Hello there, dreamer, and welcome. Tonight you are invited on a quiet journey, a journey into stillness, into peace, and into the dreams that await you. As you settle in, let the soft rhythm of your breath be your guide. Each inhale brings in calm. Each exhale lets go of the day. Together, we'll drift into a world where time slows down and all that matters is this peaceful moment. Before we begin, if this sleep journey helps you find peace and rest tonight, I kindly invite you to support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment below. Your support helps this little cozy corner of the internet grow and continue creating soothing content just like this. Now, let's settle in. Find a comfortable position, lying down or resting back, allowing your body to sink a little deeper with every breath. Gently close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. And softly exhale through your mouth. Again, a deep breath in. And let it go. With each breath, allow the day to fade away. There's nothing to do now, nowhere to be. You've done enough. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Soften the muscles around your eyes. Imagine a warm blanket of calm gently being draped over you. A comforting presence that says, you are safe, you are held, and you can let go now. Let your thoughts float like clouds across a quiet sky. No need to chase them, just notice and return to your breath. In and out. Allow your body to grow heavier, your mind lighter. Let sleep come naturally, gently in its own time. You are at peace. You are calm. And you are so deeply loved. "13 at table. In front of a spacious fireplace of the old kind, when the logs were well alight, and men with pipes and glasses were gathered before it in great easeful chairs, and the wild weather outside and the comfort that was within, and the season of the year, for it was Christmas, and the hour of the night all called for the weird or uncanny. Then out spoke the ex-master of foxhounds and told this tale. I once had an odd experience, too. It was when I had the Bromley and Sydenham, the year I gave them up. As a matter of fact, it was the last day of the season. It was no use going on because there were no foxes left in the county, and London was sweeping down on us. You could see it from the kennels all along the skyline like a terrible army in grey, and masses of villas every year came skirmishing down our valleys. Our coverts were mostly on the hills, and as the town came down upon the valleys, the foxes used to leave them and go right away out of the county, and they never returned. I think they went by night and moved great distances. Well, it was early April, and we had drawn blank all day, and at the last draw of all, the very last of the season, we found a fox. He left the covert with his back to London and its railways and villas and wire, and slipped away towards the chalk country and open Kent. I felt as I once felt as a child on one summer's day when I found a door in a garden where I played left luckily ajar, and I pushed it open, and the wide lands were before me and waving fields of corn. We settled down into a steady gallop, and the fields began to drift by under us, and a great wind arose full of fresh breath. We left the clay lands where the bracken grows and came to a valley at the edge of the chalk. As we went down into it, we saw the fox go up the other side like a shadow that crosses the evening and glide into a wood that stood on the top. We saw a flash of primroses in the wood, and we were out the other side. Hounds hunting perfectly, and the fox still going absolutely straight. It began to dawn on me then that we were in for a great hunt. I took a deep breath when I thought of it. The taste of the air of that perfect spring afternoon as it came to one galloping, and the thought of a great run, were together like some old rare wine. Our faces now were to another valley. Large fields led down to it, with easy hedges. At the bottom of it a bright blue stream went singing, and a rambling village smoked. The sunlight on the opposite slopes danced like a fairy, and all along the top old woods were frowning, but they dreamed of spring. The field had fallen of and were far behind, and my only human companion was James, my old first whip, who had a hound's instinct and a personal animosity against a fox that even embittered his speech. Across the valley the fox went as straight as a railway line, and again we went without a check straight through the woods at the top. I remember hearing men sing or shout as they walked home from work, and sometimes children whistled. The sounds came up from the village to the woods at the top of the valley. After that we saw no more villages, but valley after valley arose and fell before us as though we were voyaging some strange and stormy sea. And all the way before us the fox went dead upwind like the fabulous Flying Dutchman. There was no one in sight now but my first whip, and me. We had both of us got on to our second horses as we drew the last covert dot. 2 or 3 times we checked in those great lonely valleys beyond the village, but I began to have inspirations. I felt a strange certainty within me that this fox was going on straight upwind till he died, or until night came and we could hunt no longer. So I reversed ordinary methods and only cast straight ahead, and always we picked up the scent again at once. I believe that this fox was the last one left in the villa-haunted lands, and that he was prepared to leave them for remote uplands far from men, that if we had come the following day he would not have been there, and that we just happened to hit off his journey. Evening began to descend upon the valleys. Still the hounds drifted on, like the lazy but unresting shadows of clouds upon a summer's day. We heard a shepherd calling to his dog. We saw two maidens move towards a hidden farm, one of them singing softly. No other sounds but ours disturbed the leisure and the loneliness of haunts that seemed not yet to have known the inventions of steam and gunpowder. Even as China, they say, in some of her further mountains, does not yet know that she has fought Japan. And now the day and our horses were wearing out, but that resolute fox held on. I began to work out the run and to wonder where we were. The last landmark I had ever seen before must have been over 5 miles back, and from there to the start was at least 10 miles more. If only we could kill. Then the sun set. I wondered what chance we had of killing our fox. I looked at James's face as he rode beside me. He did not seem to have lost any confidence, yet his horse was as tired as mine. It was a good clear twilight, and the scent was as strong as ever, and the fences were easy enough. But those valleys were terribly trying, and they still rolled on and on. It looked as if the light would outlast all possible endurance, both of the fox and the horses, if the scent held good and he did not go to ground. Otherwise, night would end it. For long we had seen no houses and no roads, only chalk slopes with the twilight on them, and here and there some sheep and scattered copses darkening in the evening. At some moment I seemed to realize all at once that the light was spent and that darkness was hovering. I looked at James. He was solemnly shaking his head. Suddenly, in a little wooded valley, we saw climb over the oaks the red-brown gables of a queer old house. At that instant I saw the fox scarcely heading by 50 yards. We blundered through a wood into full sight of the house, but no avenue led up to it or even a path, nor were there any signs of wheel marks anywhere. Already lights shone here and there in windows. We were in a park, and a fine park, but unkempt beyond credibility. Brambles grew everywhere. It was too dark to see the fox anymore, but we knew he was dead beat. The hounds were just before us, and a 4-foot railing of oak. I shouldn't have tried it on a fresh horse the beginning of a run, and here was a horse near his last gasp. But what a run! An event standing out in a lifetime, and the hounds close up on their fox, slipping into the darkness as I hesitated. I decided to try it. My horse rose about 8 inches and took it fair with his breast, and the oak log flew into handfuls of wet decay, it rotten with years. And then we were on a lawn, and at the far end of it the hounds were tumbling over their fox. Fox, hounds, and light were all done together at the of a 20-mile point. We made some noise then, but nobody came out of the queer old house. I felt pretty stiff as I walked round to the hall door with the mask and the brush, while James went with the hounds and the 2 horses to look for the stables. I rang a bell marvelously encrusted with rust, and after a long while the door opened, a little way revealing a hall with much old armor in it, and the shabbiest butler that I have ever known. I asked him who lived there. Sir Richard Arlen. I explained that my horse could go no further that night, and that I wished to ask Sir Richard Arlen for a bed for the night. "Oh, no one ever comes here, sir," said the butler. I pointed out that I had come. "I don't think it would be possible, sir," he said. This annoyed me, and I asked to see Sir Richard, and insisted until he came. Then I apologized and explained the situation. He looked only 50, but a varsity oar on the wall with the date of the early 70s made him older than that. His face had something of the shy look of the hermit. He regretted that he had not room to put me up. I was sure that this was untrue. Also, I had to be put up there. There was nowhere else within miles, so I almost insisted. Then, to my astonishment, he turned to the butler and they talked it over in an undertone. At last they seemed to think that they could manage it, though clearly with reluctance. It was by now 7 o'clock, and Sir Richard told me he dined at 7:30. There was no question of clothes for me other than those I stood in, as my host was shorter and broader. He showed me presently to the drawing-room, and there he reappeared before 7:30 in evening dress and a white waistcoat. The drawing-room was large and contained old furniture, but it was rather worn than venerable. An Aubusson carpet flapped about the floor. The wind seemed momently to enter the room, and old draughts haunted corners. The stealthy feet of rats that were never at rest indicated the extent of the ruin that time had wrought in the wainscot. Somewhere far off a shutter flapped to and fro. The guttering candles were insufficient to light so large a room. The gloom that these things suggested was quite in keeping with Sir Richard's first remark to me after he entered the room. "I must tell you, sir, that I have led a wicked life. Oh, a very wicked life." Such confidences from a man much older than oneself after one has known him for half an hour are so rare that any possible answer merely does not suggest itself. I said rather slowly, "Oh, really?" And chiefly to forestall another such remark, I said, "What a charming house you have." "Yes," he said. "I have not left it for nearly 40 years. Since I left the varsity. One is young there, you know, and one has opportunities, but I make no excuses. No excuses." And the door, slipping its rusty latch, came drifting on the draught into the room, and the long carpet flapped, and the hangings upon the walls. Then the draught fell rustling away, and the door slammed to again. "Ah, Marianne," he said, "we have a guest tonight. Mr. Linton, this is Marianne Gibb." And everything became clear to me. Mad, I said to myself, for no one had entered the room. The rats ran up the length of the room behind the wainscot ceaselessly, and the wind unlatched the door again, and the folds of the carpet fluttered up to our feet and stopped there, for our weight held it down. "Let me introduce Mr. Linton," said my host. "Lady Mary Erringer." The door slammed back again. I bowed politely. Even had I been invited, I should have humored him. But it was the very least that an uninvited guest could do. This kind of thing happened 11 times. The rustling and the fluttering of the carpet and the footsteps of the rats and the restless door, and then the sad voice of my host introducing me to phantoms. Then, for some while we waited while I struggled with the situation. Conversation flowed slowly, and again the draft came trailing up the room, while the flaring candles filled it with hurrying shadows. "Ah, late again, Cicely," said my host in his soft, mournful way. "Always late, Cicely." Then I went down to dinner with that man and his mind and the 12 phantoms that haunted it. I found a long table with fine old silver on it and places laid for 14. The butler was now in evening dress. There were fewer draughts in the dining room. The scene was less gloomy there. "Will you sit next to Rosalind at the other end?" Richard said to me. "She always takes the head of the table. I wronged her most of all." I said, "I shall be delighted." I looked at the butler closely, but never did I see by any expression of his face, or by anything that he did any suggestion that he waited upon less than 14 people in the complete possession of all their faculties. Perhaps a dish appeared to be refused more often than taken, but every glass was equally filled with champagne. At first I found little to say, but when Sir Richard, speaking from the far end of the table, said, "You are tired, Mr. Linton," I was reminded that I owed something to a host upon whom I had forced myself. It was excellent champagne, and with the help of a second glass, I made the effort to begin a conversation with a Miss Helen Errold, for whom the place upon one side of me was laid. It came more easy to me very soon. I frequently paused in my monologue, like Mark Antony, for a reply, and sometimes I turned and spoke to Miss Rosalind Smith. Sir Richard, at the other end, talked sorrowfully on. He spoke as a condemned man might speak to his judge, and yet somewhat as a judge might speak to one that he once condemned wrongly. My own mind began to turn to mournful things. I drank another glass of champagne, but I was still thirsty. I felt as if all the moisture in my body had been blown away over the downs of Kent by the wind up which we had galloped. Still, I was not talking enough. My host was looking at me. I made another effort. After all, I had something to talk about. A 20-mile point is not often seen in a lifetime, especially south of the Thames. I began to describe the run to Rosalind Smith. I could see then that my host was pleased. The sad look in his face gave a kind of a flicker, like mist upon the mountains on a miserable day when a faint puff comes from the sea, and the mist would lift if it could. And the butler refilled my glass very attentively. I asked her first if she hunted, and paused and began my story. I told her where we had found the fox, and how fast and straight he had gone, and how I had got through the village by keeping to the road, while the little gardens and wire and then the river had stopped the rest of the field. I told her the kind of country that we crossed, and how splendid it looked in the spring, and how mysterious the valleys were as soon as the twilight came, and what a glorious horse I had, and how wonderfully he went. I was so fearfully thirsty after the great hunt that I had to stop for a moment now and then, but I went on with my description of that famous run, for I had warmed to the subject, and after all there was nobody to tell of it but me except my old whipper-in, and the old fellow's probably drunk by now, I thought. I described to her minutely the exact spot in the run at which it had come to me clearly that this was going to be the greatest hunt in the whole history of Kent. Sometimes I forgot incidents that had happened as one well may in a run of 20 miles, and then I had to fill in the gaps by inventing. I was pleased to be able to make the party go off well by means of my conversation, and besides that, the lady to whom I was speaking was extremely pretty. I do not mean in a flesh and blood kind of way, but there were little shadowy lines about the chair beside me that hinted at an unusually graceful figure when Miss Rosalind Smith was alive. And I began to perceive that what I first mistook for the smoke of guttering candles and a tablecloth waving in the draught was in reality an extremely animated company who listened, and not without interest, Tommy's story of by far the greatest hunt that the world had ever known. Indeed, I told them that I would confidently go further and predict that never in the history of the world would there be such a run again, only my throat was terribly dry. And then, as it seemed, they wanted to hear more about my horse. I had forgotten that I had come there on a horse. But when they reminded me, it all came back. They looked so charming leaning over the table intent upon what I said, that I told them everything they wanted to know. Everything was going so pleasantly if only Sir Richard would cheer up. I heard his mournful voice every now and then. These were very pleasant people, if only he would take them the right way. I could understand that he regretted his past, but the early 70s seemed centuries away, and I felt sure that he misunderstood these ladies. They were not revengeful as he seemed to suppose. I wanted to show him how cheerful they really were, and so I made a joke and they laughed at it, and then I chaffed them a bit, especially Rosalind, and nobody resented it in the very least. And still Sir Richard sat there with that unhappy look, like one that has ended weeping because it is vain and has not the consolation even of tears. We had been a long time there, and many of the candles had burned out, but there was light enough. I was glad to have an audience for my exploit, and being happy myself, I was determined Sir Richard should be. I made more jokes, and they still laughed good-naturedly. Some of the jokes were a little broad, perhaps, but no harm was meant. And then, I do not wish to excuse myself, but I had had a harder day than I ever had had before, and without knowing it, I must have been completely exhausted. In this state, the champagne had found me, and what would have been harmless at any other time must somehow have got the better of me when quite tired out. Anyhow, I went too far. I made some joke, I cannot in the least remember what, that suddenly seemed to offend them. I felt all at once a commotion in the air, I looked up and saw that they had all arisen from the table and were sweeping towards the door. I had not time to open it, but it blew open on a wind. I could scarcely see what Sir Richard was doing because only 2 candles were left. I think the rest blew out when the ladies suddenly rose. I sprang up to apologize, to assure them, and then fatigue overcame me as it had overcome my horse at the last fence. I clutched at the table, but the cloth came away, and then I fell. The fall, and the darkness on the floor, and the pent-up fatigue of the day overcame me all 3 together. The sun shone over glittering fields, and in at a bedroom window, and thousands of birds were chanting to the spring. And there I was in an old 4-poster bed in a quaint old paneled bedroom, fully dressed and wearing long muddy boots. Someone had taken my spurs, and that was all. For a moment I failed to realize, and then it all came back. My enormity and the pressing need of an abject apology to Sir Richard. I pulled an embroidered bell rope until the butler came. He came in perfectly cheerful and indescribably shabby. I asked him if Sir Richard was up, and he said he had just gone down, and told me to my amazement that it was 12 o'clock. I asked to be shown in to Sir Richard at once. He was in his smoking room. "Good morning," he said cheerfully the moment I went in. I went directly to the matter in hand. "I fear that I insulted some ladies in your house," I began. "You did indeed," he said. "You did indeed." And then he burst into tears and took me by the hand. "How can I ever thank you?" he said to me then. "We have been 13 at table for 30 years, and I never dared to insult them because I had wronged them all. And now you have done it, and I know they will never dine here again." And for a long time he still held my hand, and then he gave it a grip and a kind of a shake, which I took to mean goodbye, and I drew my hand away then and left the house. And I found James in the stables with the hounds, and asked him how he had fared. And James, who was a man of very few words, said he could not rightly remember, and I got my spurs from the butler and climbed onto my horse, and slowly we rode away from that queer old house, and slowly we wended home, for the hounds were footsore but happy, and the horses were tired still. And when we recalled that the hunting season was ended, we turned our faces to spring and thought of the new things that try to replace the old. And that very year I heard, and have often heard since, of dances and happier dinners at Sir Richard Arlen's house. The bird of the difficult eye. Observant men and women that know their Bond Street well will appreciate my astonishment when in a jeweler's shop I perceived that nobody was furtively watching me. Not only this, but when I even picked up a little carved crystal to examine it, no shop assistants crowded round me. I walked the whole length of the shop, still no one politely followed. Seeing from this that some extraordinary revolution had occurred in the jewelry business, I went with my curiosity well aroused to a queer old person, half demon and half man, who has an idol shop in a byway of the city, and who keeps me informed of affairs at the edge of the world. and briefly over a pinch of heather incense that he takes by way of snuff, he gave me this tremendous information. That Mr. Neepy Thang, the son of Thangobrind, had returned from the edge of the world, and was even now in London. The information may not appear tremendous to those unacquainted with the source of jewelry, but when I say that the only thief employed by any West End jeweler since famous Thangobrind's distressing doom is this same Neepy Thang, and that for lightness of fingers and swiftness of stockinged foot they have none better in Paris, it will be understood why the Bond Street jewelers no longer cared what became of their old stock. There were big diamonds in London that summer, and a few considerable sapphires. In certain astounding kingdoms behind the East, strange sovereigns missed from their turbans the heirlooms of ancient wars. And here and there the keepers of crown jewels, who had not heard the stockinged feet of Thang, were questioned and died slowly. And the jewelers gave a little dinner to Thang at the Hotel Great Magnificent. The windows had not been opened for 5 years, and there was wine at £1 a bottle that you could not tell from champagne and cigars at £0.50 with a Havana label. Altogether, it was a splendid evening for Thang. But I have to tell of a far sadder thing than a dinner at a hotel. The public require jewelry, and jewelry must be obtained. I have to tell of Neepy Thang's last journey. That year the fashion was emeralds. A man named Green had recently crossed the channel on a bicycle, and the jewelers said that a green stone would be particularly appropriate to commemorate the event, and recommended emeralds. Now a certain money-lender of Cheapside, who had just been made a peer, had divided his gains into 3 equal parts, one for the purchase of the peerage, country house and park, and the 20,000 pheasants that are absolutely essential, and one for the upkeep of the position, while the third he banked abroad, partly to cheat the native tax-gatherer, and partly because it seemed to him that the days of the peerage were few, and that he might at any moment be called upon to start afresh elsewhere. In the upkeep of the position he included jewelry for his wife, and so it came about that Lord Castlenorman placed an order with 2 well-known Bond Street jewelers named Messrs. Grosvenor and Campbell to the extent of £100,000 for a few reliable emeralds. But the emeralds in stock were mostly small and shop-soiled, and Neepy Thang had to set out at once before he had had as much as a week in London. I will briefly sketch his project. Not many knew it, for where the form of business is blackmail, the fewer creditors you have, the better, which of course in various degrees applies at all times. On the shores of the risky seas of Shirura, Shan grows 1 tree only, so that upon its branches, if anywhere in the world, there must build its nest, the bird of the difficult eye. Neepy Thang had come by this information, which was indeed the truth, that if the bird migrated to fairyland before the 3 eggs hatched out, they would undoubtedly all turn into emeralds, while if they hatched out first, it would be a bad business. When he had mentioned these eggs to Messrs. Grosvenor and Campbell, they had said, "The very thing." They were men of few words in English, for it was not their native tongue. So Neepy Thang set out. He bought the purple ticket at Victoria Station. He went by Herne Hill, Bromley and Bickley, and past St. Mary Cray. At Ainsford he changed, and taking a footpath along a winding valley went wandering into the hills. And at the top of a hill in a little wood, where all the anemones long since were over, and the perfume of mint and thyme from outside came drifting in with thang, he found once more the familiar path, age-old and fair as wonder, that leads to the edge of the world. Little to him were its sacred memories that are one with the secret of earth, for he was on business, and little would they be to me if I ever put them on paper. Let it suffice that he went down that path, going further and further from the fields we know, and all the way he muttered to himself, "What if the eggs hatch out and it be a bad business?" The glamour that is at all times upon those lonely lands that lie at the back of the chalky hills of Kent intensified as he went upon his journeys. Queerer and queerer grew the things that he saw by Little World End path. Many a twilight descended upon that journey with all their mysteries, many a blaze of stars. Many a morning came flaming up to a tinkle of silvern horns, till the outpost elves of fairyland came in sight, and the glittering crests of fairyland's 3 mountains betokened the journey's end. And so with painful steps, for the shores of the world are covered with huge crystals, he came to the risky seas of Shirorashan and saw them pounding to gravel the wreckage of fallen stars, saw them and heard their roar, those shipless seas that between earth and the fairies' homes heave beneath some huge wind that is none of our four. And there in the darkness on the grisly coast, for darkness was swooping slantwise down the sky as though with some evil purpose, there stood that lonely, gnarled, and deciduous tree. It was a bad place to be found in after dark, and night descended with multitudes of stars. Beasts prowling in the blackness gluttered. See any dictionary, but in vain. At Neepy Thang. And there, on a lower branch, within easy reach, he clearly saw the bird of the difficult eye sitting upon the nest for which she is famous. Her face was towards those 3 inscrutable mountains far off on the other side of the risky seas, whose hidden valleys are fairyland. Though not yet autumn in the fields we know, it was close on midwinter here, the moment as Thang knew when those eggs hatch out. Had he miscalculated and arrived a minute too late? Yet the bird was even now about to migrate. Her pinions fluttered, and her gaze was toward fairyland. Thang hoped and muttered a prayer to those pagan gods whose spite and vengeance he had most reason to fear. It seems that it was too late, or a prayer too small to placate them, for there and then the stroke of midwinter came, and the eggs hatched out in the roar of Shirorashan, or ever the bird was gone with her difficult eye, and it was a bad business indeed for Neepy Thang. I haven't the heart to tell you any more. "'Ere," said Lord Castle-Norman some few weeks later to Messrs. Grosvenor and Campbell, "you aren't 'arf taking your time about those emeralds." Once upon a time, ever so many years ago, there lived a little old man and a little old woman. Very old indeed were they, for they had lived nearly 100 years. But they took neither joy nor pleasure in anything, and this because they had no children. They were now about to keep the 75th anniversary of their wedding day, known as the Diamond Wedding, but no guests were invited to share their simple feast. As they sat side by side, they went over in memory the years of their long life, and as they did so, they felt sure that it was to punish them for their sins, that God had denied them the sweet happiness of having children about them, and as they thought, their tears fell fast. At that moment, someone knocked. "Who is there?" cried the old woman, and ran to open the door. There stood a little old man leaning on a stick and white as a dove. "What do you want?" asked the old woman. "Charity," answered he. The good old woman was kind-hearted, and she cut her last loaf in two, giving one half to the beggar, who said, "I see you have been weeping, good wife, and I know the reason of your tears. But cheer up, by God's grace you shall be comforted. Though poor and childless today, tomorrow you shall have family and fortune." When the old woman heard this, she was overjoyed, and fetching her husband, they both went to the door to invite the old man in. But he was gone, and though they searched for him in every direction, they found nothing but his stick lying on the ground. For it was not a poor old beggar, but an angel of God who had knocked. Our good friends did not know this, so they picked up the stick and hurried off to find the old man, with the purpose of returning it. But it seemed as if the stick, like its master, were endowed with some marvelous power, for whenever the old man or the old woman tried to pick it up, it slipped out of their hands and rolled along the ground. Thus they followed it into a forest, and at the foot of a shrub which stood close by a stream, it disappeared. They hunted all round the shrub, thinking to find the stick there, but instead of the stick they came upon a bird's nest containing 12 eggs, and from the shape of the shells it seemed as if the young ones were ready to come forth. "Pick up the eggs," said the old man. "They will make us an omelet for our wedding feast." The old woman grumbled a little, but she took the nest and carried it home in the skirt of her gown. Fancy their astonishment when at the end of 12 hours there came out, not unfledged birdlings, but 12 pretty little boys. Then the shells broke into tiny fragments, which were changed into as many gold pieces. Thus, as had been foretold, the old man and his wife found both family and fortune. Now these 12 boys were most extraordinary children. Directly they came out of the shells, they seemed to be at least 3 months old. Such a noise did they make, crying and kicking about. The youngest of all was a very big baby with black eyes, red cheeks, and curly hair, and so lively and active that the old woman could hardly keep him in his cradle at all. In 12 hours' time the children seemed to be a year old and could walk about and eat anything. Then the old woman made up her mind that they should be baptized, and thereupon sent her husband to fetch priest and organist without delay. And the diamond wedding was celebrated at the same time as the christening. For a short time their joy was clouded over by the disappearance of the youngest boy, who was also the best-looking and his parents' favorite. They had begun to weep and mourn for him as if he were lost, when suddenly he was seen to come from out of the sleeves of the priest's cassock, and was heard to speak these words, Never fear, dear parents. Your beloved son will not perish." The old woman kissed him fondly and handed him to his godfather, who presented him to the priest. So they had named him Nizhganek, that is, imperishable. The 12 boys went on growing at the rate of 6 weeks every hour, and at the end of 2 years were fine, strong young men. Nizhganek, especially, was of extraordinary size and strength. The good old people lived happily and peacefully at home while their sons worked in the fields. On one occasion the latter went plowing, and while the 11 eldest used the ordinary plow and team of oxen, Nizhganek made his own plow, and it had 12 plowshares and 12 handles, and to it were harnessed 12 team of the strongest working oxen. The others laughed at him, but he did not mind, and turned up as much ground as his 11 brothers together. Another time, when they went haymaking, and his brothers used the ordinary scythes, he carried one with 12 blades, and managed it so cleverly, in spite of the jests of his companions, that he cut as much grass as all of them together. And again, when they went to turn over the hay, Nizhganek used a rake with 12 teeth, and so cleared 12 plots of ground with every stroke. His haycock, too, was as large as a hill in comparison with those of his brothers. Now, the day after the making of the haycocks, the old man and his wife happened to be in the fields, and they noticed that one haycock had disappeared. So, thinking wild horses had made off with it, they advised their sons to take turns in watching the place. The eldest took his turn first, but after having watched all night fell asleep towards morning, when he awoke to find another haycock missing. The second son was not more fortunate in preventing the disappearance of the hay, while the others succeeded no better. In fact, of all the 12 haycocks, there only remained the largest, Nizhganek's, and even that had been meddled with. When it was the youngest's turn to watch, he went to the village blacksmith and got him to make an iron club weighing 260 pounds. So heavy was it that the blacksmith and his assistants could hardly turn it on the anvil. In order to test it, Nizhganek whirled it round his head and threw it up in the air, and when it had nearly reached the ground he caught it on his knee, upon which it was smashed to atoms. He then ordered another weighing 480 pounds, and this the blacksmith and his men could not even move. Nizhganek had helped them to make it, and when finished, he tested it in the same manner as the first. Finding it did not break, he kept it, and had in addition a noose plaited with 12 strong ropes. Towards nightfall he went to the field, crouched down behind his haycock, crossed himself, and waited to see what would happen. At midnight there was a tremendous noise which seemed to come from the east, while in that direction appeared a bright light. Then a white mare, with 12 colts as white as herself, trotted up to the haycock and began to eat it. Nizhganek came out of his hiding place, and throwing the noose over the mare's neck, jumped on her back and struck her with his heavy club. The terrified creature gave the signal to the colts to escape, but she herself, hindered by the noose, out of breath, and wounded by the club, could not follow, but sank down on the earth, saying, "Do not choke me, Nizhganek." He marveled to hear her speak human language, and loosened the noose. When she had taken breath, she said, "Knight, if you give me my liberty, you shall never repent it. My husband, the dappled horse with golden mane, will cruelly revenge himself upon you when he knows I am your prisoner. His strength and swiftness are so great you could not escape him. In exchange for my freedom, I will give you my 12 colts, who will serve you and your brothers faithfully." On hearing their mother neigh, the colts returned and stood with bent heads before the young man, who released the mare and led them home. The brothers were delighted to see Nisguinik return with 12 beautiful white horses, and each took the one that pleased his fancy most, while the thinnest and weakest looking was left for the youngest. The old couple were happy in the thought that their son was brave as well as strong. One day it occurred to the old woman that she would like to see them all married, and to have the house merry with her daughters-in-law and their children. So she called upon her gossips and friends to talk the matter over, and finally persuaded her husband to be of the same opinion. He called his sons around him and addressed them thus: "Listen to me, my sons. In a certain country lives a celebrated witch known as Old Yaga. She is lame and travels about in an oaken trough. She supports herself on iron crutches, and when she goes abroad carefully removes all traces of her steps with a broom. This old witch has 12 beautiful daughters who have large dowries. Do your best to win them for your wives. Do not return without bringing them with you." Both parents blessed their sons, who, mounting their horses, were soon out of sight. All but Nisguinik, who, left alone, went to the stable and began to shed tears. "Why do you weep?" asked his horse. "Don't you think I have good reason?" replied he. "Here I have to go a long, long way in search of a wife, and you, my friend, are so thin and weak that were I to depend upon your strength I should never be able to join my brothers." "Do not despair, Nisguinik," said the horse. "Not only will you overtake your brothers, but you will leave them far behind. I am the son of the dappled horse with the golden mane, and if you will do exactly as I tell you, I shall be given the same power as he. You must kill me and bury me under a layer of earth and manure, then sow some wheat over me, and when the corn is ripe it must be gathered and some of it placed near my body." Nisguinik threw his arms round his horse's neck and kissed him fondly, then led him into a yard and killed him with one blow of his club. The horse staggered a moment and then fell dead. His master covered him with a layer of manure and earth, upon which he sowed wheat, as had been directed. It was immediately watered by a gentle rain, and warmed by the heat of the sun's rays. The corn took root and ripened so quickly that on the 12th day Nisguinik set to work to cut, thresh, and winnow it. So abundant was it that he was able to give 11 measures to his parents, and keeping one for himself, spread it before his horse's bones. In a very short time the horse moved his head, sniffed the air, and began to devour the wheat. As soon as it was finished he sprang up, and was so full of life that he wanted to jump over the fence in one bound. But Nisguinik held him by the mane, and getting lightly on his back, said, "Halt there, my spirited steed. I do not want others to have the benefit of all the trouble I have had with you. Carry me to old Yaga's house." He was of a truth a most magnificent horse, big and strong, with eyes that flashed like lightning. He leapt up into the air as high as the clouds, and the next moment descended in the middle of a field, saying to his master, "As we have first to see old Yaga, from whom we are still a great way off, we can stop here for a short time. Take food and rest. I will do the same." Your brothers will be obliged to pass us, for we are a good way in front of them. When they come, you can go on together to visit the old witch. Remember, though it is difficult to get into her house, it is much more difficult still to get out. But if you would be perfectly safe, take from under my saddle a brush, a scarf, and a handkerchief. They will be of use in helping you to escape. For when you unroll the scarf, a river will flow between you and your enemy. If you shake the brush, it will become a thick forest, and by waving the handkerchief, it will be changed into a lake. After you have been received into Yaga's house, and your brothers have stabled their horses and gone to bed, I will tell you how to act. For 12 days Nizginik and his horse rested and gained strength, and at the end of the time the 11 brothers came up. They wondered greatly to see the youngest, and said, "Where on earth did you come from, and whose horse is that?" "I have come from home. The horse is the same I chose at first. We have been waiting here 12 days. Let us go on together now." Within a short time they came to a house surrounded by a high oaken paling, at the gate of which they knocked. Old Yaga peeped out through a chink in the fence and cried, "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are 12 brothers come to ask the 12 daughters of Yaga in marriage. If she is willing to be our mother-in-law, let her open the door." The door was opened, and Yaga appeared. She was a frightful-looking creature, old as the hills, and being one of those monsters who feed on human flesh, the unfortunate wretches who once entered her house never came out again. She had a lame leg, and because of this she leaned on a great iron crutch, and when she went out removed all traces of her steps with a broom. She received the young travelers very graciously, shut the gate of the courtyard behind them, and led them into the house. Nizginik's brothers dismounted, and taking their horses to the stables, tied them up to rings made of silver. The youngest fastened his to a copper ring. The old witch served her guests with a good supper, and gave them wine and hydromel to drink. Then she made up 12 beds on the right side of the room for the travelers, and on the left side 12 beds for her daughters. All were soon asleep except Nizginik. He had been warned beforehand by his horse of the danger that threatened them, and now he got up quietly and changed the positions of the 24 beds, so that the brothers lay to the left side of the room, and Yaga's daughters to the right. At midnight, old Yaga cried out in a hoarse voice, "Guzla, play, sword, strike." Then were heard strains of sweet music, to which the old woman beat time from her oaken trough. At the same moment a slender sword descended into the room, and passing over to the beds on the right, cut off the heads of the girls one by one, after which it danced about and flashed in the darkness. When the dawn broke, the guzla ceased playing, the sword disappeared, and silence reigned. Then Nizginik softly aroused his brothers, and they all went out without making any noise. Each mounted his horse, and when they had broken open the yard gate, they made their escape at full speed. Old Yaga, thinking she heard footsteps, got up and ran into the room where her daughters lay dead. At the dreadful sight she gnashed her teeth, barked like a dog, tore out her hair by handfuls, and seating herself in her trough as in a car, set off after the fugitives. She had nearly reached them, and was already stretching out her hand to seize them, when Nizginik unrolled his magic scarf, and instantly a deep river flowed between her and the horsemen. Not being able to cross it, she stopped on the banks and, howling savagely, began to drink it up. "Before you have swallowed all that river, you will burst, you wicked old witch," cried Nizginek. Then he rejoined his brothers. But the old woman drank all the water, crossed the bed of the river in her trough, and soon came near the young people. Nizginek shook his handkerchief, and a lake immediately spread out between them. So she was again obliged to stop, and shrieking with rage began to drink up the water. "Before you have drunk that lake dry, you will have burst yourself," said Nizginek, and rode after his brothers. The old vixen drank up part of the water, and turning the remainder into a thick fog, hastened along in her trough. She was once more close upon the young men, when Nizginek, without a moment's delay, seized his brush, and as he waved it in the air, a thick forest rose between them. For a time the witch was at a loss to know what to do. On one side she saw Nizginek and his brothers rapidly disappearing, while she stood on the other, hindered by the branches and torn by the thorns of the thick bushes, unable either to advance or retreat. Foaming with rage, with fire flashing from her eyes, she struck right and left with her crutches, crashing trees on all sides. But before she could clear away, those she was in pursuit of had got more than 100 miles ahead. So she was forced to give up, and grinding her teeth, howling and tearing out her hair, she threw after the fugitives such flaming glances from her eyes that she set the forest on fire, and taking the road home was soon lost to sight. The travelers, seeing the flames, guessed what had happened, and thanked God for having preserved them from such great dangers. They continued their journey, and by eventide arrived at the top of a steep hill. There they saw a town besieged by foreign troops, who had already destroyed the outer part, and only awaited daylight to take it by storm. The 12 brothers kept out of sight behind the enemy, and when they had rested and turned out their horses to graze, all went to sleep except Nizginek, who kept watch without closing an eye. When everything was perfectly still, he got up, and calling his horse, said, "Listen, yonder in that tent sleeps the king of this besieging army, and he dreams of the victory he hopes for on the morrow. How could we send all the soldiers to sleep and get possession of his person?" The horse replied, "You will find some dried leaves of the herb of sleep in the pocket of the saddle. Mount upon my back and hover round the camp, spreading fragments of the plant. That will cause all the soldiers to fall into a sound sleep, after which you can carry out your plans." Nizginek mounted his horse, pronouncing these magic words: "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, let us go. Rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight, haste to the camp of the foe." The horse glanced upwards as if he saw someone beckoning to him from the clouds, then rose rapidly as a bird on the wing and hovered over the camp. Nizginek took handfuls of the herb of sleep from the saddle pockets and sprinkled it all about, upon which all in the camp, including the sentinels, fell at once into a heavy sleep. Nizginek alighted, entered the tent, and carried off the sleeping king without any difficulty. He then returned to his brothers, unharnessed his horse, and lay down to rest, placing the royal prisoner near him. His Majesty slept on as if nothing unusual had taken place. At daybreak the soldiers of the besieging army awoke, and not being able to find their king, were seized with such a panic of terror that they retreated in great disorder. The ruler of the besieged city would not at first believe that the enemy had really disappeared, and indeed went himself to see if it was true. Of a truth there remained nothing of the enemy's camp but a few deserted tents whitening on the plain. At that moment Nizginek came up with his brothers and said, "Sire, the enemy has fled, and we were unable to detain them. But here is their king whom we have made prisoner, and whom I deliver up to you." The ruler replied, "I see indeed that you are a brave man among brave men, and I will reward you. This royal prisoner is worth a large ransom to me. So speak. What would you like me to do for you?" "I should wish, sire, that my brothers and I might enter the service of your majesty." "I am quite willing," answered the king. Then, having placed his prisoner in charge of his guards, he made Nizginek general and placed him at the head of a division of his army. The 11 brothers were given the rank of officers. When Nizginek appeared in uniform, and with saber in hand mounted his splendid charger, he looked so handsome and conducted the maneuvers so well that he surpassed all the other chiefs in the country, thus causing much jealousy even among his own brothers, for they were vexed that the youngest should outshine them, and so determined to ruin him. In order to accomplish this, they imitated his handwriting, and placed such a note before the king's door while Nizginek was engaged elsewhere. When the king went out, he found the letter, and calling Nizginek to him, said, "I should very much like to have the phonic ghazla you mention in your letter." "But, sire, I have not written anything about a ghazla," said he. "Read the note, then. Is it not in your handwriting?" Nizginek read, "In a certain country within the house of old Yaga is a marvelous ghazla. If the king wish, I will fetch it for him. Signed, Nizginek." "It is true," said he, "that this writing resembles mine, but it is a forgery, for I never wrote it." "Never mind," said the king. "As you were able to take my enemy prisoner, you will certainly be able to succeed in getting old Yaga's ghazla. Go then, and do not return without it, or you will be executed." Nizginek bowed and went out. He went straight to the stable, where he found his charger looking very sad and thin, his head drooping before the trough, the hay untouched. "What is the matter with you, my good steed? What grieves you?" "I grieve for us both, for I foresee a long and perilous journey." "You are right, old fellow, but we have to go. And what is more, we have to take away and bring here old Yaga's ghazla. And how shall we do it, seeing that she knows us?" "We shall certainly succeed if you do as I tell you." Then the horse gave him certain instructions, and when Nizginek had led him out of the stable and mounted, he said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, do not wait on the road. Rise in the air, like a bird take thy flight, haste to the wicked old Yaga's abode." The horse arose in the air as if he heard someone calling to him from the clouds, and flitting rapidly along, passed over several kingdoms within a few hours, thus reaching old Yaga's dwelling before midnight. Nizginek threw the leaves of sleep in at the window, and by means of another wonderful herb caused all the doors of the house to open. On entering, he found old Yaga fast asleep, with her trough and iron crutches beside her, while above her head hung the magic sword and ghazla. While the old witch lay snoring with all her might, Nizginek took the ghazla and leapt on his horse, crying, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, Horse of my heart, while I sing, rise in the air like a bird, take thy flight, haste to the court of my king. Just as if the horse had seen something in the clouds, he rose swift as an arrow and flew through the air above the fogs. The same day about noon he neighed before his own manger in the royal stable, and Nizhgynech went into the king and presented him with the guzla. On pronouncing the two words, guzla play, strains of music so gay and inspiriting were heard that all the courtiers began dancing with one another. The sick who listened were cured of their diseases, those who were in trouble and grief forgot their sorrows, and all living creatures were thrilled with a gladness such as they had never felt before. The king was beside himself with joy. He loaded Nizhgynech with honors and presents, and in order to have him always at court, raised him to a higher rank in the army. In this new post he had many under him, and he showed much exactitude in drill and other matters, punishing somewhat severely when necessary. He made, too, no difference in the treatment of his brothers, which angered them greatly and caused them to be still more jealous and to plot against him. So they again imitated his handwriting and composed another letter, which they left at the king's door. When his majesty had read it, he called Nizhgynech to him and said, "I should much like to have the marvelous sword you speak of in your letter." "Sire, I have not written anything about a sword," said Nizhgynech. "Well, read it for yourself." And he read, "In a certain country within the house of old Yaga is a sword that strikes of its own accord. If the king would like to have it, I will engage to bring it him. Signed, Nizhgynech." "Certainly," said Nizhgynech. "This writing resembles mine, but I never wrote those words." "Never mind, as you succeeded in bringing me the guzla, you will find no difficulty in obtaining the sword. Start without delay, and do not return without it at your peril." Nizhgynech bowed and went to the stable, where he found his horse looking very thin and miserable, with his head drooping. "What is the matter, my horse? Do you want anything?" "I am unhappy because I foresee a long and dangerous journey." "You are right, for we are ordered to return to Yaga's house for the sword. But how can we get hold of it? Doubtless she guards it as the apple of her eye." The horse answered, "Do as I tell you, and all will be right." And he gave him certain instructions. Nizhgynech came out of the stable, saddled his friend, and mounting him said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white. Horse of my heart, do not wait on the road. Rise in the air like a bird, take thy flight. Haste to the wicked old witch's abode." The horse rose immediately as if he had been beckoned to by someone in the clouds, and passing swiftly through the air, crossed rivers and mountains, till at midnight he stopped before old Yaga's house. Since the disappearance of the guzla, the sword had been placed on guard before the house, and whoever came near it was cut to pieces. Nizhgynech traced a circle with holy chalk, and placing himself on horseback in the center of it, said, "Sword, who of thyself can smite? I come to brave thy ire. Peace or war upon this sight of thee I do require. If thou canst conquer, thine my life. Should I beat thee, then ends this strife." The sword clinked, leapt into the air, and fell to the ground divided into 1,000 other swords, which ranged themselves in battle array and began to attack Nizhgynech. But in vain. They were powerless to touch him, for on reaching the chalk-traced circle they broke like wisps of straw. Then the sword-in-chief, seeing how useless it was to go on trying to wound him, submitted itself to Nizhgnek and promised him obedience. Taking the magic weapon in his hand, he mounted his horse and said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, while I sing, rise in the air like a bird, take thy flight, back to the court of my king." The horse started with renewed courage, and by noon was eating his hay in the royal stables. Nizhgnek went into the king and presented him with the sword. While he was rejoicing over it, one of his servants rushed in quite out of breath and said, "Sire, your enemies who attacked us last year, and whose king is your prisoner, surround our town. Being unable to redeem their sovereign, they have come with an immense army and threaten to destroy us if their king is not released without ransom." The king armed himself with the magic sword, and going outside the city walls, said to it as he pointed to the enemy's camp, "Magic sword, smite the foe." Immediately the sword clinked, leapt flashing in the air, and fell in 1,000 blades that threw themselves on the camp. One regiment was destroyed during the first attack, another was defeated in the same way, while the rest of the terrified soldiers fled and completely disappeared. Then the king said, "Sword, return to me." The 1,000 swords again became one, and so it returned to its master's hand. The victorious king came home filled with joy. He called Nizhgnek to him, loaded him with gifts, and assuring him of his favor, made him the highest general of his forces. In carrying out the duties of this new post, Nizhgnek was often obliged to punish his brothers, who became more and more enraged against him, and took counsel together how they might bring about his downfall. One day the king found a letter by his door, and after reading it he called Nizhgnek to him and said, "I should very much like to see Princess Sudolisu, whom you wish to bring me. Sire, I do not know the lady and have never spoken to her. Here, look at your letter." Nizhgnek read, "Beyond the 9 kingdoms, far beyond the ocean, within a silver vessel with golden masts lives Princess Sudolisu. If the king wishes it, I will seek her for him. Signed, Nizhgnek." It is true the writing is like unto mine. Nevertheless, I neither composed the letter nor wrote it. "No matter," answered the king. "You will be able to get this princess as you did the guzla and the sword. If not, I will have you killed." Nizhgnek bowed and went out. He entered the stable where stood his horse, looking very weak and sad, with his head bent down. "What is the matter, dear horse? Are you in want of anything?" "I am sorrowful," answered the horse, "because I foresee a long and difficult journey." "You are right, for we have to go beyond the 9 kingdoms and far beyond the ocean to find Princess Sudolisu. Can you tell me what to do?" "I will do my best, and if it is God's will, we shall succeed. Bring your club of 480 pounds weight, and let us be off." Nizhgnek saddled his horse, took his club, and mounting said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, do not lag on the road. Rise in the air, through the clouds take thy flight. Haste to Princess Sudolisu's abode." Then the horse looked up as if there were something he wanted in the clouds, and with a spring flew through the air, swift as an arrow. And so by the 2nd day they had passed over 10 kingdoms, and finding themselves beyond the ocean, halted on the shore. Here the horse said to Nizhgnek, Do you see that silver ship with golden masts that rides on the waves yonder? That beautiful vessel is the home of Princess Sudalisu, youngest daughter of old Yaga. For after the witch had lost the guzla and magic sword, she feared to lose her daughter too. So she shut her up in that vessel, and having thrown the key thereof into the ocean, sat herself in her oaken trough, where with the help of the iron crutches she rows round and round the silver ship, warding off tempests and keeping at a distance all other ships that would approach it. The first thing to be done is to get the diamond key that opens the ship. In order to procure this, you must kill me, and then throw into the water one end of my entrails, by which bait you will trap the king of the lobsters. Do not set him free until he has promised to get you the key, for it is this key that draws the vessel to you of its own accord." "Ah, my beloved steed," cried Nizginek, "how can I kill you when I love you as my own brother, and when my fate depends upon you entirely? Do as I tell you, you can bring me to life again as you did before." Nizginek caressed his horse, kissed him and wept over him, then raising his mighty club struck him full on the forehead. The poor creature staggered and fell down dead. Nizginek cut him open, and putting an end of his entrails in the water, he kept hold of it and hid himself in the water rushes. Soon there came a crowd of crawfish, and amongst them a gigantic lobster as large as a year-old calf. Nizginek seized him and threw him on the beach. The lobster said, "I am king of all the crawfish tribe. Let me go, and I will give you great riches for my ransom." "I do not want your riches," answered Nizginek, "but in exchange for your freedom give me the diamond key which belongs to the silver ship with the golden masts, for in that vessel dwells Princess Sudalisu." The king of the crawfish whistled, upon which myriads of his subjects appeared. He spoke to them in their own language and dismissed one, who soon returned with the magic diamond key in his claws. Nizginek loosed the king of the crawfish, and hiding himself inside his horse's body as he had been instructed, lay in wait. At that moment an old raven, followed by all his nestlings, happened to pass, and attracted by the horse's carcass, he called to his young ones to come and feast with him. Nizginek seized the smallest of the birds and held it firmly. "Let my birdling go," said the old raven. "I will give you in return anything you like to ask. Fetch me then 3 kinds of water, the life-giving, the curing, and the strengthening." The old raven started off, and while awaiting his return, Nizginek, who still held the ravenling, questioned him as to where he had come from and what he had seen on his travels, and in this way heard news of his brothers. When the father bird returned, carrying with him the bottles filled with the marvelous waters, he wanted to have his nestling back. "One moment more," said Nizginek. "I want to be sure that they are of the right sort." Then he replaced the entrails in the body of his horse and sprinkled him first with the life-giving, then with the curing, and finally with the strengthening water, after which his beloved steed leapt to his feet full of strength and cried, "Ah, how very soundly I have slept." Nizginek released the young raven and said to his horse, "For sure you would have slept to all eternity, and have never seen the sun again, if I had not revived you as you taught me." While speaking, he saw the marvelous ship sparkling white in the sun. She was made entirely of pure silver, with golden masts. The rigging was of silk, the sails of velvet. and the whole was enclosed in a casing of impenetrable steel network. Nizhgynech sprang down to the water's edge armed with his club, and rubbing his forehead with the diamond key said, "Riding on the ocean waves a magic ship I see. Stop and change thy course, O ship. Here I hold the key. Obey the signal known to thee and come at once direct to me." The vessel turned right round and came at full speed towards land, and right onto the bank, where it remained motionless. Nizhgynech smashed in the steel network with his club, and opening the doors with the diamond key, there found Princess Sudalisu. He made her unconscious with the herb sleep, and lifting her before him on his horse, said, "Marvel of strength and of beauty so white, horse of my heart, while I sing, swift as an arrow through space, take thy flight straight to the court of my king." Then the horse, as if he saw some strange thing in the clouds, lifted himself in the air and began to fly through space so rapidly that in about 2 hours he had crossed rivers, mountains, and forests, and had reached his journey's end. Although Nizhgynech had fallen violently in love with the princess himself, he took her straight to the royal palace and introduced her to the king. Now she was so exquisitely beautiful that the monarch was quite dazzled by looking at her, and being thus carried away by his admiration, he put his arm round her as if to caress her. But she rebuked him severely. "What have I done to offend you, princess? Why do you treat me so harshly?" "Because in spite of your rank you are ill-bred. You neither ask my name nor that of my parents, and you think to take possession of me as if I were but a dog or a falcon. You must understand that he who would be my husband must have triple youth, that of heart, soul, and body." "Charming princess, if I could become young again, we would be married directly," she replied. "But I have the means of making you so, and by help of this sword in my hand. For with it I will pierce you to the heart, then cut up your body into small pieces, wash them carefully, and join them together again. And if I breathe upon them, you will return to life young and handsome, just as if you were only 20 years of age." "Oh, indeed. I should like to know who would submit to that. First make trial of Sir Nizhgynech here." The princess looked at him, whereupon he bowed and said, "Lovely princess, I willingly submit, although I am young enough without it. In any case, life without you would be valueless." Then the princess took a step towards him and killed him with her sword. She cut him up in pieces and washed these in pure water, after which she joined them together again and breathed upon them. Instantly Nizhgynech sprang up full of life and health, and looked so handsome and bright that the old king, who was dreadfully jealous, exclaimed, "Make me too young again, princess. Do not lose a moment." The princess pierced him to the heart with her sword, cut him up into little pieces, and opening the window threw them out, at the same time calling the king's dogs, who quickly ate them up. Then she turned to Nizhgynech and said, "Proclaim yourself king, and I will be your queen." He followed her advice, and within a short time they were married, his brothers, whom he had pardoned, and his parents having been invited to the wedding. On their way back from the church, the magic sword suddenly clinked, and flashing in the air divided itself into 1,000 swords that placed themselves on guard as sentinels all round the palace. The guzla, too, began to play so sweetly and gaily that every living thing began to dance for joy. The festival was magnificent. I myself was there and drank freely of wine and mead, and although not a drop went into my mouth, my chin was quite wet. The Long Porter's Tale. There are things that are known only to the Long Porter of Tong Tong Tarrup as he sits and mumbles memories to himself in the little bastion gateway. He remembers the war there was in the halls of the gnomes, and how the fairies came for the opals once, which Tong Tong Tarrup has, and the way that the giants went through the fields below, he watching from his gateway. He remembers quests that are even yet a wonder to the gods. Who dwells in those frozen houses on the high bare brink of the world, not even he has told me, and he is held to be garrulous. Among the elves, the only living things ever seen moving at that awful altitude where they quarry turquoise on earth's highest crag, his name is a byword for loquacity wherewith they mock the talkative. His favorite story, if you offer him bash, the drug of which he is fondest, and for which he will give his service in war to the elves against the goblins, or vice versa if the goblins bring him more. His favorite story, when bodily soothed by the drug and mentally fiercely excited, tells of a quest undertaken ever so long ago for nothing more marketable than an old woman's song. Picture him telling it, an old man, lean and bearded and almost monstrously long, that lolled in a city's gateway on a crag perhaps 10 miles high, the houses for the most part facing eastward, lit by the sun and moon and the constellations we know, but one house on the pinnacle looking over the edge of the world and lit by the glimmer of those unearthly spaces where one long evening wears away the stars. My little offering of bash, a long forefinger that nipped it at once on a stained and greedy thumb. All these are in the foreground of the picture. In the background, the mystery of those silent houses, and of not knowing who their denizens were, or what service they had at the hands of the Long Porter, and what payment he had in return, and whether he was mortal. Picture him in the gateway of this incredible town, having swallowed my bash in silence, stretch his great length, lean back, and begin to speak. It seems that one clear morning 100 years ago, a visitor to Tong Tong Tarrup was climbing up from the world. He had already passed above the snow and had set his foot on a step of the earthward stairway that goes down from Tong Tong Tarrup onto the rocks, when the Long Porter saw him. And so painfully did he climb those easy steps that the grizzled man on watch had long to wonder whether or not the stranger brought him bash, the drug that gives a meaning to the stars and seems to explain the twilight. And in the end there was not a scrap of bash, and the stranger had nothing better to offer that grizzled man than his mere story only. It seems that the stranger's name was Gerald Jones, and he always lived in London, but once as a child he had been on a northern moor. It was so long ago that he did not remember how, only somehow or other he walked alone on the moor, and all the ling was in flower. There was nothing in sight but ling and heather and bracken, except far off near the sunset on indistinct hills. There were little vague patches that looked like the fields of men. With evening, a mist crept up and hid the hills, and still he went walking on over the moor. And then he came to the valley, a tiny valley in the midst of the moor, whose sides were incredibly steep. He lay down and looked at it through the roots of the ling. And a long, long way below him, in a garden by a cottage, with hollyhocks all round her that were taller than herself, there sat an old woman on a wooden chair, singing in the evening. And the man had taken a fancy to the song and remembered it after in London. And whenever it came to his mind, it made him think of evenings, the kind you don't get in London, and he heard a soft wind going idly over the moor and the bumblebees in a hurry, and forgot the noise of the traffic. And always, whenever he heard men speak of time, he grudged to time most this song. Once afterwards he went to that northern moor again and found the tiny valley, but there was no old woman in the garden, and no one was singing a song. And either regret for the song that the old woman had sung on a summer evening 20 years away and daily receding troubled his mind, or else the wearisome work that he did in London, for he worked for a great firm that was perfectly useless, and he grew old early, as men do in cities. And at last, when melancholy brought only regret, and the uselessness of his work gained round him with age, he decided to consult a magician. So to a magician he went and told him his troubles, and particularly he told him how he had heard the song. "And now," he said, "it is nowhere in the world." "Of course it is not in the world," the magician said, "but over the edge of the world you may easily find it." And he told the man that he was suffering from flux of time and recommended a day at the edge of the world. Jones asked what part of the edge of the world he should go to, and the magician had heard Tong Tong Tarrup well spoken of. So he paid him, as is usual, in opals, and started at once on the journey. The ways to that town are winding. He took the ticket at Victoria Station that they only give if they know you. He went past Blyth. He went along the hills of Neil Hunger and came to the Gap of Poi. All these are in that part of the world that pertains to the fields we know. But beyond the Gap of Poi on those ordinary plains that so closely resemble Sussex, one first meets the unlikely. A line of common grey hills, the hills of Sneg, may be seen at the edge of the plain from the Gap of Poi. It is there that the incredible begins, infrequently at first, but happening more and more as you go up the hills. For instance, descending once into Poi Plains, the first thing that I saw was an ordinary shepherd watching a flock of ordinary sheep. I looked at them for some time, and nothing happened, when, without a word, one of the sheep walked up to the shepherd and borrowed his pipe and smoked it, an incident that struck me as unlikely. But in the hills of Sneg, I met an honest politician. Over these plains went Jones, and over the hills of Sneg, meeting at first unlikely things, and then incredible things. till he came to the long slope beyond the hills that leads up to the edge of the world, and where, as all guidebooks tell, anything may happen. You might at the foot of this slope see here and there things that could conceivably occur in the fields we know. But soon these disappeared, and the traveler saw nothing but fabulous beasts, browsing on flowers as astounding as themselves, and rocks so distorted that their shapes had clearly a meaning, being too startling to be accidental. Even the trees were shockingly unfamiliar. They had so much to say, and they leant over to one another whenever they spoke and struck grotesque attitudes and leered. Jones saw 2 fir trees fighting. The effect of these scenes on his nerves was very severe. Still he climbed on, and was much cheered at last by the sight of a primrose, the only familiar thing he had seen for hours, but it whistled and skipped away. He saw the unicorns in their secret valley. Then night in a sinister way slipped over the sky, and there shone not only the stars, but lesser and greater moons. And he heard dragons rattling in the dark dot. With dawn there appeared above him among its amazing crags the town of Tong Tong Tarrup, with the light on its frozen stairs, a tiny cluster of houses far up in the sky. He was on the steep mountain now. Great mists were leaving it slowly, and revealing as they trailed away more and more astonishing things. Before the mist had all gone, he heard quite near him, on what he had thought was Bear Mountain, the sound of a heavy galloping on turf. He had come to the plateau of the centaurs, and all at once he saw them in the mist. There they were, the children of fable, 5 enormous centaurs. Had he paused on account of any astonishment, he had not come so far. He strode on over the plateau and came quite near to the centaurs. It is never the centaurs' wont to notice men. They pawed the ground and shouted to one another in Greek, but they said no word to him. Nevertheless, they turned and stared at him when he left them, and when he had crossed the plateau and still went on, all 5 of them cantered after to the edge of their green land. For above the high green plateau of the centaurs is nothing but naked mountains, and the last green thing that is seen by the mountaineer as he travels to Tong Tong Tarrup is the grass that the centaurs trample. He came into the snowfields that the mountain wears like a cape, its head being bare above it, and still climbed on. The centaurs watched him with increasing wonder. Not even fabulous beasts were near him now, nor strange demoniac trees. Nothing but snow and the clean bare crag above it, on which was Tong Tong Tarrup. All day he climbed, and evening found him above the snow line. And soon he came to the stairway cut in the rock, and in sight of that grizzled man, the long porter of Tong Tong Tarrup, sitting mumbling amazing memories to himself and expecting in vain from the stranger a gift of bash. It seems that as soon as the stranger arrived at the bastion gateway, tired though he was, he demanded lodgings at once that commanded a good view of the edge of the world. But the long porter, that grizzled man, disappointed of his bash, demanded the stranger's story to add to his memories before he would show him the way. And this is the story, if the long porter has told me the truth, and if his memory is still what it was. And when the story was told, the grizzled man arose, and dangling his musical keys, went up through door after door and by many stairs, and led the stranger to the topmost house, the highest roof in the world, and in its parlor showed him the parlor window. There the tired stranger sat down in a chair and gazed out of the window sheer over the edge of the world. The window was shut, and in its glittering panes the twilight of the world's edge blazed and danced, partly like glowworms' lamps and partly like the sea. It went by rippling, full of wonderful moons. But the traveler did not look at the wonderful moons, for from the abyss there grew with their roots in far constellations a row of hollyhocks, and amongst them a small green garden quivered and trembled as scenes tremble in water. Higher up, ling in bloom was floating upon the twilight. More and more floated up till all the twilight was purple. The little green garden low down was hung in the midst of it, and the garden down below, and the ling all round it, seemed all to be trembling and drifting on a song. For the twilight was full of a song that sang and rang along the edges of the world, and the green garden and the ling seemed to flicker and ripple with it as the song rose and fell, and an old woman was singing it down in the garden. A bumblebee sailed across from over the edge of the world, and the song that was lapping there against the coasts of the world, and to which the stars were dancing, was the same that he had heard the old woman sing long since down in the valley in the midst of the northern moor dot. But that grizzled man, the long porter, would not let the stranger stay because he brought him no bash, and impatiently he shouldered him away, himself not troubling to glance through the world's outermost window. For the lands that time afflicts, and the spaces that time knows not, are all one to that grizzled man. And the bash that he eats more profoundly astounds his mind than anything man can show him either in the world we know or over the edge. And bitterly protesting, the traveler went back and down again to the world. Accustomed as I am to the incredible from knowing the edge of the world, the story presents difficulties to me. Yet it may be that the devastation wrought by time is merely local, and that outside the scope of his destruction, old songs are still being sung by those that we deem dead. I try to hope so. And yet the more I investigate the story that the long porter told me in the town of Tong Tong Tarap, the more plausible the alternative theory appears. That grizzled man is a liar.